Hi, welcome to For Better for Verse, the podcast where a married couple takes on the scriptures. I'm Justin Crisp.
I'm Jewel Bickle, and today we're talking about Luke chapter 12 and then most of chapter 13, all the way to verse 30.
So Jesus continues his journey to Jerusalem, his journey towards the cross. And the author of Luke's gospel continues to give us sayings and teachings that Jesus would be delivering in the various towns and villages at which he stops on his way to Jerusalem. We get a long discussion of God's provision for us and Jesus's attitude towards fearless confession, the need not to worry about our earthly lives, given God's provision of us. And then as we move into chapter 13, we've got a teaching that Jesus gives on suffering and the nature of suffering. That infamous question, why do bad things happen to good people? But we get a little bit of Jesus's commentary there. We should start with Jesus's teaching about fearless confession. So this is chapter 12, beginning at verse 4. I tell you, my friends, Jesus said, do not fear those who kill the body, and after that have nothing more that they can do. But I will warn you whom to fear. Fear him who, after he has killed, has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies, and not one of them is forgotten before God? Why, even the hairs of your head are all numbered. So fear not. You are of more value than many sparrows. And I tell you, everyone who acknowledges me before men, the Son of Man also will acknowledge before the angels of God. But the one who denies me before men will be denied before the angels of God. I'll just stop here.
Yeah.
Got a lot going on here. You got the assertion of God's provision for us, but you also have what sounds like a threat.
It definitely sounds a little bit like a threat. You do this for me or you don't do this for me?
Yeah, seems pretty tit for tat.
Yes, indeed.
Well, there's one thing that I want to underline here at the beginning. Fear him who, after he is killed, has authority to cast into hell. It's interesting that the word translated hell here refers to a place called Gehenna. Gehenna was a ravine south of Jerusalem that the Judeans used as a trash dump. Jesus is using this term Gehenna rather than another term which is often translated into English as hell, namely Hades. And Hades is referring to an Old Testament idea, sort of netherworld of spirits, neither heaven nor hell in our post Christian imagination, but a place called Sheol in Hebrew. Often, when you see hell in the New Testament, it's really Hades. It's referring to that netherworld. Here, Jesus is referring to Gehenna, this trash dump outside of Jerusalem.
And not just was it a trash dump, but there are these rumors that at some point in time, they had human sacrifice happening over
Mm,
there too.
wow.
So it has multiple layers of this hellness, if you will. The fire, the trash, sacrificing
Yeah.
people.
And so when Jesus is talking to other first century Judeans and Gentiles in this context, they would know where Gehenna was. They would associate Gehenna with this rumor that it was a site for human
Mhm.
sacrifice. It's a place where some of the trash is on fire, and then this physical location, Gehenna, takes on a metaphorical meaning, like an afterlife destination. And Jesus is saying, don't fear those who can just kill your body. Fear God who has control over your eternal destiny. I do take some consolation in the fact that just because, well, Jesus says that God has the authority to cast into hell. He doesn't say you're going to get cast into hell. He just says, fear him who has the authority to cast into hell. At least he hasn't said you're going to get cast into hell yet.
Right. We've talked in our Bible study with the staff about how sometimes it feels like all these stories put together and these sayings are really jumping from one thing to the other thing. But what really strikes me about chapter 12, now that I look at it all together, is it really seems to have a common theme throughout it, right? So do not fear those who can kill the body. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies, and yet not one of them is forgotten by God? We move into then the parable in a minute and onto the sort of saying about worries. And it seems like he's really trying to take our focus away from material things and encourage sort of more spiritual orientation.
I think that's exactly right. Jesus is, as we're going to see later in chapter 12, Jesus is stressed. He actually says he is stressed. This is chapter 4, verse 50. How great is my distress. Okay, Jesus is under incredible stress. He's going towards Jerusalem. He knows what awaits him there, namely his death. He's not gentle Jesus, meek and mild. This is Jesus who is hangry and upset and distracted and so on. He's got a little bit of an edge to him. This passage about acknowledging Christ before human beings, and if you don't acknowledge Christ before them, then you will be denied by the Son of Man before the
Mm-hmm.
angels of God. It used to cause me such incredible stress as a
I
child.
know. Uh-huh. Me too.
It's often, or I would just say in my childhood, it was used in my childhood youth group really to put pressure on us to become like martyrs. Um, it,
That's exactly what it was.
it really was. I don't think that can't possibly be what Jesus means here. I think that in context, what Jesus is saying is God will take care of you eternally, and that's where you ought to put your trust.
Mm-hmm.
And the sort of tit for tat, you do this for me, I'll do this for you, I just don't think that's how God works in the long run. I
Mm-hmm.
think Jesus is again shocking our spiritual systems in order to get us to trust something bigger than us and something with a longer horizon than us. And he does it using this transactional language, but I don't think, I'll just say there's this beautiful passage from Second Timothy chapter 2 where the author of Second Timothy, it's ascribed to the Apostle Paul, but we don't know if it's actually Paul who wrote it. The author is riffing on this passage, and the author says, first, if we deny Jesus, he will deny us, which is kind of quoting this, but then he follows that up with this statement. This is verse
Mm-hmm.
13 of chapter 2 of Second Timothy. If we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot disown himself. Sometimes translated, he cannot deny himself. God has this character that God is always going to take care of us. God makes his rain to shine on the just and the unjust. God turns the other cheek. God is the one who loves God's enemies, and so on. We've been talking about this for some time.
Mm-hmm.
This transactional language Jesus is using can't be the whole point. And
Okay, so let's talk about this parable though, because I
yeah,
know you have feelings about this rich fool parable, right? So
tell
there,
us the story.
oh, I'd love to. All right. So there is someone's talking with Jesus and they say, "Hey, teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me," which should let you know that there have been the same problems for thousands and thousands of years. And Jesus says, like, really? This is what I'm supposed to be doing? And instead, he says, take guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. So he goes on to tell the story of this rich man who has an abundance of crops, so much so that he can't even fit them in his barn. Wouldn't that be nice? So he has to build a bigger barn, right? And when he goes to bed, he's like really proud of himself. And he says, soul, that's what he calls himself. You have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But then God said to him, you fool, this very night, your life is being demanded of you, right? So you have all these possessions, but if you're dead, what are you going to do with a bunch of crops? And just a quick note about the Greek there, the way God responds, it's really kind of tricky to say in English what's happening because it's almost like he's saying these things demand your life.
Wow.
Something like, fool, in this night your soul they demand from you, they being the possessions.
That's incredible. So Jesus ends that parable by saying, so is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. I take it that the meaning of this parable is much like the meaning of the previous passage, that we are to entrust our destinies ultimately to the one who has the eternal view and eternal authority. Now, this one's a little difficult for me because this man is he's storing up crops so that he feels he has enough for his future. And when he finally has enough, then he dies. And that's Jesus's point, is
Mm-hmm.
that you cannot possibly, by the accumulation of possessions, prevent life from happening to you, preventing death from happening to you. All of that is outside of your control. And as somebody who's pretty focused on like financial planning and
That's what he does for fun.
things like, well, professionally, I do things like, pay attention to the church's endowment assets. And personally, yeah, we go on vacation and I start doing retirement planning, start dreaming of what retirement might be like. Super focused on a 401k and that kind of thing. And Jesus is basically saying, look, don't think your 401k is going to save you. And it is true, the 401k will not save you. I would like to, gently say to Jesus, you died at 33. For those of us who are going to live a little past 33, hopefully, maybe we should store up some things in a barn. Maybe we don't need multiple barns full like the rich man in this story, but a little, if you don't save enough, you could end up in a lot of trouble that way too. Anyway, I struggle with this. I think that the through line is trust God. Don't trust your own ingenuity, don't trust your own savings, and so on. And all that is true so far as it goes. And yet, saving enough does make a difference to your earthly life.
This is all about greed, right? Remember, that's what the response
Okay.
is about, greed.
All right.
And so I've been thinking about why would they say the things demand this of you? It's kind of like they took ownership over him. He was so obsessed with collecting things that became sort of his boss. They told him what to do. So they demand his life. I think that's a little different. I don't think Jesus is saying, like, neglect your 401k, live on faith for the next however many years of your life and see what happens. I don't think that's what he's saying. I think maybe he's saying something more like, don't let this be your hope. Don't let this become your whole world.
Okay, that's good, because if you do make your possessions, your assets, your financial planning, your hope, your like existential foundation, then you're never really going to have enough. The rich man in the story, kind of remarkable that he ends up saying that he's got enough, that he can really relax, eat, drink, and be merry. I think for most people, including myself, that threshold of enough,
More.
you never get enough when you think that this is what's going to save you.
I think goes really well into the next section. I mentioned to you earlier this week how interesting it is to me because we see these in clips in the church, this little section here and there. And reading it all together is quite lovely because we have this section about like don't put your hope in your possessions. And then immediately we get the saying on worry. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, about your body, what you will wear, for life is more than food and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, or consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They never toil or spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory, not clothed. And so, in some ways, I feel like it's a response to the parable.
He immediately follows up the harsh word about putting your hope in possessions with the fact of God's provision for us. I do laugh at Jesus when he says, do not be anxious about your life, which is about the least helpful thing you can say to somebody who's anxious about their life. When you tell somebody who's anxious, don't be anxious, it normally just makes the anxiety even worse.
Yeah.
Jesus was not a therapist, so that's not what he's about.
No, I'm not sure he was worried about that.
No, but it's tender, this passage. Jesus, even though he is stressed, the language that he uses is awfully tender. Consider the ravens, consider the lilies. I mean, it's really quite beautiful,
It is.
this description of God's provision for us.
It is. And I think that in some ways it's sort of lifting the burden that you feel like the parable gives to you.
Yeah, the parable of the rich fool before it.
Mhm.
Well, then you're going to get another parable right after that passage about keeping your lamps
Yes.
burning. So this is verse 35 and following in chapter 12. Jesus says, "Stay dressed for action and keep your lamps burning, and be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes." He's enjoining the crowd to stay alert and to be be vigilant in waiting for God to come knocking. God's coming knocking in a lot of ways here. God's coming knocking to the one who makes or doesn't make a fearless confession. God's coming knocking with the rich
Mhm.
fool by saying, "This night your soul is required of you." And Jesus is basically saying, stay vigilant, stay awake, be
Mhm.
prepared whenever God comes into your life and comes into the world. That comes immediately after another tender saying. It says, "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." So you got this back and forth in all of these passages between Jesus putting responsibility on our shoulders and Jesus relieving the responsibility that is on our shoulders because God has taken it and God will take care of us. Again, I think it's that back and forth movement. It's the 1-2 punch of God's going to care for you. And so don't trust anything else to take care of you because it's not going to work. And I know you secretly are trusting other things other than God to take care of you, and that's going to be a problem for you. But God is going to take care of you. It's that 1-2 punch over and over and over again that Jesus is working with.
Mhm. Mhm. Perhaps just trying to, through repetition, beat it into our heads.
I mean, I need a beat into my head. I mean, I can be quite anxious about my life. I try very hard to entrust my life to the Lord, but it's a daily struggle to hand over everything that is happening
Mhm.
in my life and your life, our life, and Beatrice's life, and Val the dog's life. It's a daily struggle to hand all of that over to God. It's not a one and done thing. I have to return to this 1-2
Again, you have to
punch
keep doing
over
it
and over.
every day, over and over again. Every new thing. I was laughing when he said has a lot of anxiety about his life, but I have even more. So don't. I can't actually judge him for any of that.
'Cause the people out there in Podland are saying, "Oh my gosh, really, I'm really not measuring up to Jesus saying, 'Do not fear, do not be anxious about your life. Don't worry, neither do
We are.
we.'"
Whew,
That's the message.
that is the message.
But but even if we are faithless, he will remain faithful, for he cannot
That's it.
disown
You got to go
himself.
back to
Second
that.
Timothy.
Go back to that.
Yeah. Should we talk about this? "I came to cast fire
Yeah.
on the earth, and would that it were already kindled." That's verse 49,
Oh
50.
no.
What is he
And then he
going
goes
on
on to
about?
say, no, I tell you, I can't came to bring division, right? So it's like Prince of Peace. Just kidding. I think that this can be interpreted as we should be divisive.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
is absolutely not what's going on here, right? It is not, Jesus is not saying to go pick a fight, which sometimes I feel like people take these verses to me. I do think he's laying it out as honest. You deciding to focus on him, put your hope in him, could put you at odds with people who are here, your family, your friends, right? You're not worried about possessions anymore. So who's going to take care of them? And it can cause division in these ways. I think he's just being honest. He's just saying, my message is not everyone's in for it.
Yeah, it's not gonna be everybody's cup of tea.
No, it's not. I think that also this might possibly be a little beginning of a hint towards the Messiah that he's going to be. So many of them thought that he was the Messiah who's going to come in and save them from the Romans, and then they would live in peace,
Interesting.
right?
Yeah.
But then, once I mean, obviously there'd be some skirmishes for him to win, but then once he won, they would have that peace, right?
Yeah. The
Uh,
Pax Christus would replace the Pax Romana.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think this is kind of a hint at like, that's not what I'm here for.
It's true. He's not the kind of Messiah who's gonna enforce unity. He's saying he's not gonna come and smooth out all of human history all of a sudden. He never promises to do that. In fact, he says he's going to do the opposite after he gets to Jerusalem, after he dies, even after he's resurrected, ostensibly. He says, from now on, in one house, there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against father, and mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, and mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, over and over and over again. This is Jesus the realist. And this is Jesus saying, this is the kind of God that we really have. And this is the kind of Messiah I am going to be, the kind of Savior I'm going to be. He's not going to smooth it out, because smoothing it out would mean using violence and coercion. That's not God's way.
Style. No.
Somehow God has to figure out a way to save us without coercing us. And that's a pretty tall order, given just how recalcitrant we are as creatures.
Yes, yes.
I think this is the only way that God could possibly have done this, to save us without coercing us, given our recalcitrance.
Yes.
But it's not pretty in the meantime.
No, no, no. And I mean, at the very end, after this, he's talking to them about this, and he says, you guys are hypocrites. You're able to interpret the sky. You see clouds and you think it's going to rain, but why can't you interpret like the present time?
Yeah.
And that might be even reference to him and going towards Jerusalem. And many of the lines, well, we'll get to next week, where he's like, have to go to Jerusalem, have to do it.
Yep.
That's where we're headed.
Yep. That's right. And that leads us into the beginning of chapter 13 with Jesus's commentary on several tragedies that were ripped from the headlines of his day. The first is that there were some Galileans whose blood Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor under whom he would eventually be crucified, that Pontius Pilate had killed and executed some Galileans while they were making their sacrifices. Not a lot more is known about it, but it is on brand for Pilate. Pilate was not a nice dude. Pilate was infamous for being tyrannical and violent, exactly the kind of leader, the kind of ruler Jesus, in the image of his God and Father, just the kind of leader Jesus is not. Pilate is ruthless. And then you've got the second headline is the tower in Siloam. There's a pool of Siloam, which is part of the wall in Jerusalem. There would have been a tower there next to the pool. The tower fell and it killed 18 people. And in both cases, Jesus asks a rhetorical question and gives an actual answer. He says, do you think that the Galileans were worse sinners than all other Galileans because they suffered in this way? No, I tell you. Or those 18 on whom the tower in Siloam fell and killed them, do you think that they were worse offenders than all others who lived in Jerusalem? No, I tell you. Now he follows both of those no, I tell yous up with but unless you repent, you will all likewise perish. This is Jesus under distress. Exactly. This is the 1-2 punch again. Boom, boom. But the first bit, the no, I tell you, is really important because it is even suggested in large parts of the Bible, like the book of Proverbs, that bad things happen to people because they're bad people. Bad people do bad things and then bad happens to them. And if you think that you're good and that you don't deserve the bad thing happening to you, you're just in denial, or you've forgotten what bad thing it was that happened to you. It's called the law of retribution. And Jesus is refuting that. He is saying these Galileans didn't die. They weren't killed by Pilate because they were worse sinners than everybody else. That's not it. He says the same thing about those on whom the tower fell. They were not worse offenders than everybody else who lived in Jerusalem. No, I tell you, bad things don't happen only to bad people. Bad things happen to everybody without any reference to our moral character. And then the second punch, after having delivered a compassionate pastoral word, the second punch is, but you need to repent. If you are focused on your eternal, your real spiritual destiny, you still need to attend to your affairs. You still need to attend to your relationship with God. He follows up with a parable about a man who has a fig tree and his gardener, when the owner of the fig tree wants to cut it down because it hasn't borne any fruit, the gardener says, hey, can I just take this for one more year? And you put some manure on it, fertilize it, and see if next year it'll bear fruit. and the owner agrees, I think is about God's patience with us. It is
Mm.
again about God's refusal to smooth out by coercion, even divine coercion, the violence and sin and tribulation of our world. God is waiting for us,
Mhm.
as it were, to get our acts together a little
Mhm.
bit.
Mhm. It's kind of like a hug after this 1-2 punch.
It is.
In some ways, just because, it's a unless you repent, you all perish, as they did, but God is patient. God will wait on you. One
Yeah.
more year. One more year.
The fact that God is patient even with Pilate is, I think, the really hard thing for us. At least it is the hard thing for me. God's not only patient with the Galileans and with those on whom the tower fell, God is
Mm,
patient.
this
God's even patient with Pilate. There's a cost to God saving in this way. God's refusal to permit any collateral damage to his work of salvation is there's a sacrifice, one which he bears himself in his body and in his soul on the cross. It's no wonder Jesus is so distressed. It's no wonder he's so distressed. But it could be distressing for us too. I mean, sometimes, I wish that God would act a little more like the Terminator and just,
mm,
stop at the division, just get us all in line. But God ultimately knows better than I do. I am sure of it.
mhm, mhm, but it is I mean, it is hard to see so many things happening in the world, so many people hurting, and to be patient on God, to patiently wait for God this time. We're the
Mhm,
ones who are waiting for the fig tree then also. We're
mhm.
like, "Come on. Are you gonna show your glory yet, or am I just gonna be here for another year watching all this stuff happen?" That is really challenging, I think, but as we'll continue to talk about in the next couple weeks, especially with some of the parables that we have coming up,
Mhm.
um, that real grace, like real deep grace, has a cost, right? You give up justice, you give up fairness, and that can be really hard to accept. But when we are faithless, he remains faithful.
I can't think of a better word to end on than that one. This has been For Better for Verse. Boy, we are really wrestling with Jesus, who is really wrestling with us. We hope that all of
Mm,
you might also feel free to wrestle with the text, to talk back to Jesus as Jesus talks to you, talk back to him as we have here, and you
mhm,
never know what might happen. Please also feel free to wrestle with us and talk back to us. We love it when you comment. We love it when you write to us or call us. Please do be in touch. Please like, share, and subscribe. However, it is that you get your podcasts, help us to continue to share the grace of the God of the Bible with the world in great need of it. Thanks be to God. God cannot disown himself, he will take care of us.
amen.
We'll see you next week.